AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. The program is Focal Point. The network is AFR Talk, the most dangerous and feared radio network in all of America, the place where you can come for the unvarnished truth. I'm going to talk with Bill Federer here in just a moment. Looking at a couple of stories just from this morning. 100,000 Christians have fled Egypt since the ascent to power of the Muslim Brotherhood. Got another story here about 100 Christians being arrested and tortured in the country of Libya. So we continue to see that under Islam, when it's practiced, when it goes on full display, there is no such thing as religious tolerance, no such thing as religious freedom, no such thing as respect for women, no such thing as freedom of speech or freedom of religion. That's the true face of Islam. Now, here to help us sort through some of this is Bill Federer, a noted historian and author of the book, What Every Christian Needs to Know About the Quran. Bill, welcome back to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Brian, great to be with you.
Well, a couple of things I want to talk with you about today, Bill. I want to talk with you kind of in the second half of this segment about the threat that we face from Islam today, but I want to go back. Keith Ellison is a Muslim congressman from Minnesota, made a big, fat deal out of getting sworn in on Thomas Jefferson's Quran. And what I would like you to do, if you got a couple of minutes, Bill, is just fill us in on Thomas Jefferson and how he became aware of the religion of Islam and how he dealt with it.
Thank you so much. Well, Muhammad dies in the year 632 A.D., and the Muslim caliphs after him, the rightly guided caliphs, conquer Egypt, which, as you talked about, it used to be Christian for 6 centuries, evangelized by Mark that wrote the gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They had to smuggle his bones out of Egypt by packing him under pork. And then Muslims conquered Jerusalem, which had been a Byzantine Christian city for 3 centuries. Then Muslims conquered Syria. Syria was the first country to completely be Christian, evangelized by Paul. And Antioch, Syria, was where the name Christian was first used. Then all of Morocco, Algiers, Tunisia, Libya were Christian. There were 250 Catholic dioceses along North Africa in the 7th century, all wiped out in 1 generation. Then Muslims invaded Spain, conquered it, millions died. They crossed the Pyrenees. They were finally stopped just outside of Paris at the Battle of Tours by Charles Martel, the grandfather of Charlemagne. Anyway, this is the Umayyad Muslim Empire. It is the largest empire in the world, and Christianity basically became exterminated in these areas for all practical purposes. And then the Turks converted to Islam, and they invaded what is today Turkey, but it used to be the Byzantine Christian Empire, where, all 7 churches mentioned in the book of Revelation were. Finally, in 1453, Muslims conquered Constantinople, the New York, Washington, D.C. capital of the world, and that ends land trade routes with India and China. And so that's when Columbus sets sail to find a sea route to India and China. So anyway, Muhammad had been a religious leader, political leader, and then a military leader. He fought in 66 battles, and he robbed caravans. He had a whole chapter of the Quran on how to distribute booty from robbing caravans. So these Muslims that followed him would rob ships. And so these Muslim Barbary pirates from North Africa would capture over 1 million Europeans and sell them into slavery, into harems, into caravans. Of course, they enslaved over 180 million Africans, castrate the men, make them eunuchs, sell the women into the sex trade. I mean, even David Livingstone was the missionary to the Congo, and he would write about seeing a woman shot on the side of the road, and, she was purchased by some Muslim slave trader and walked too slowly, so he killed her. David Livingstone said you could track the Muslim slave traders by the vultures in the sky because they'd kill the ones that wouldn't walk fast enough. He stumbles across one. There's 1,000 Africans chained together, walking single file through the jungle, 500 miles to the coast by these Muslim slave traders. One time they gave David Livingstone a paddle boat, sort of like a little steamboat on the Lake Malawi and the river, but it wouldn't work because it was getting clogged by hitting all the dead bodies that the Muslims would throw in there of the Africans. So these Arabs had the slave trade. In Europe, there were entire Catholic orders during the Middle Ages called Trinitarians. The head of the order was the ransomer, and they would collect alms and donations and go under a white flag to North Africa to get your friend back who was captured from a Greek island or an Italian coast or the coast of Spain or Portugal. Well, by the time Jefferson comes along, the different countries of Europe were paying annual tributes to these Muslim pirates. Sweden, France, Spain paying millions of dollars. Jefferson is an ambassador in France, and lo and behold, the Muslims in Morocco finally figure out we're our own country, and so they say we need to pay our own tribute. And so the Muslims capture the Polly, the Marie, these different ships, and Jefferson has to borrow 80,000 guilders from the Dutch to ransom back our sailors. And when Jefferson meets with Abdurrahman, the Muslim ambassador, he asks him why they were boarding defenseless ships with daggers clenched in their teeth. And he says that the ambassador answered us that it was written in the laws of their prophet and in their Quran that all nations who should not acknowledge Islam's authority were sinners. And it was their right and duty to make them slaves, and all Muslimen, they call them Muslimen that shall be slain are surely to go to paradise if they're, are in the fight with taking these ships. Well, that is why Jefferson bought a Quran to figure out what is in this book that is making them attack us when we haven't done anything to them. And so when Keith Ellison swears into Congress using Jefferson's Quran, it was the irony of ironies that the press was saying, this is wonderful. Jefferson loved Islam too. It's like, no, he was fighting a war against them and trying to figure out why in the world they were attacking us. And anyway, we were paying 20% of our federal budget to these Muslim pirates. We had Captain William Bainbridge bringing over bags of gold to the Dey of Algiers, D-E-Y. That was the name of their pasha, their leader. And Jefferson gets to be the third president, and he gets fed up and says, look, all this money we're paying in tribute, we could put into a Navy, and he sends over our ships with the Navy and the Marines, and that is the Barbary Pirate War, and we get the Marine anthem from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. We force them to sign a treaty, and the leader says, your treaty, we'll sign it, but as soon as we regain our strength, your treaty is waste paper. And so sure enough, they start the war again, and we have James Madison, and he has to send in our Marines again for the second Barbary Pirate War. But we have this history that we can be knowledgeable of or we can be ignorant of. But the thing that nobody can get around is that the Muslims today that are doing the violence and advancing, they see themselves as carrying on in the tradition of these Muslims and rightly guided caliphs and ultimately Muhammad, who fought in 66 battles. And Islam is a religion, yes, but it is also a political system and a military system with 1,400 years of conquest.
Now, let me ask this question, Bill. Talking here with historian and author Bill Federer, author of the book What Every Christian Needs to Know About the Quran. Excellent resource. Bill, as we look back, we've got now 1,400 years of Muslim history to observe. You look back on the entire history of the Muslim religion, it's always advancing their religion at the point of a sword. It's barbaric. There's no room for dissent. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, Bill, I think that's where the Marines got the term fighting leathernecks, wasn't it? Where they put a leather around their necks because they knew the Muslims would try to cut their heads off?
Right. They would make these wide leather belts that would go around their neck so that the Muslims couldn't chop their heads off, because Muhammad said to chop off the heads of the enemies in battle. So
let me ask you this, Bill. Looking at today, because we've got to deal with the issue of Islam today, we've got a lot of Muslim refugees. We've kind of delegated the selection of refugees that come to our shores to the United Nations. They're virtually sending us nothing but Muslims. So our Muslim population is growing through immigration. We've seen what Major Nadal Hassan did at Fort Hood. I'm a Muslim first and an American second. He shot 13 of his comrades so he wouldn't be sent over to Afghanistan to fight his fellow Muslims. So, and what Muslims want us to believe is that this is a religion of peace. Respond to that. And then, Bill, if you would, we've got just about 2-3 minutes left. Tell us what you think the United States, what we need to do to protect ourselves from the threat of Islam.
Islam is a religion of peace. It's just their definition of the word peace is different than ours. Our definition of peace is different groups getting along. Their definition of peace is when the whole world submits to the will of Allah, there will be peace. In other words, to them, world peace means world Islam. And so it's important to understand with Israel, their roadmap to peace really should be called the roadmap for coexistence, right? But peace, they have a whole different definition. To understand what's going on, Muhammad's life is the DNA. Muhammad is the perfect Muslim. So if we can understand his life, we can understand those that are trying to follow him. His life is called the Sunnah, the way, the example. So Muhammad was a religious leader for 12 years in the pagan city of Mecca. They decide that he's disturbing the peace, so they chase him out of town. He goes to Medina, a Jewish city, presents his faith, but they reject him. So he goes into the minority neighborhoods and begins to get a little following. Again, he goes back to the Jewish leaders, and he presents himself as a political leader, and they make a treaty with him, so he's a political leader as well as a religious leader. Then Muhammad's followers in Mecca get a little pushy, argumentative, and threatening. They're chased out of town, and Muhammad permits his followers to rob the caravans headed to Mecca in retaliation for the Meccans chasing them out of town. So where Jesus said, if they take your coat, give them your shirt, Muhammad said, if they take your house, you retaliate, take their caravan. And so he fights in 66 battles. Muhammad even used the catapult when he attacked the city of Al-Taif. And when he was told the catapult was killing women and children, his response was, they are among them. So they got to be killed too. So suicide bombers today, they want to imitate Muhammad religiously, politically, and militarily. And it's okay to kill innocent people because Muhammad did when he used the catapults. And so we need to understand that Islam is a religion, yes, but it is also a political and a military system. So a mosque is a religious, political, and military building. Bowing to Mecca is a religious, political, and military pledging of allegiance to another capital. And so as Muslims come in, they go through the two phases based on the two cities Muhammad lived in. The first city, Mecca, Muhammad was just a religious leader. So the immigrants that come in are just religious. And as they come in, they're nice. And they're genuinely nice. And most of them just see their own life. They don't see the whole picture. But it's designed that more come in. They gravitate, form a community, get involved in politics. And then when they begin to take over a neighborhood, violence happens and there's no witnesses because no Muslim will testify against another Muslim. So they immigrate, increase, and eliminate. And I hear the music. So anyway, AmericanMinute.com is the site.
AmericanMinute.com for more information about the religion of Islam. Our guest has been Bill Federer. Urge you to get his book, What Every Christian Needs to Know About the Quran. Bill, as always, thank you for being with us.
Hey, thank you, Brian. You're tremendous.
And so, I'm looking at a piece here from the Daily Mail Online over in the UK. It's about a publication, a glossy publication from Al-Qaeda, from Muslims. And it contains extensive, this just was published this last week, a guide on how to torch cars and how to make bombs, and lists 11 people in the West that ought to be taken dead or alive. That's Islam Today. Focal Point, AFR Talk.